Colleen here, DIYer behind LemonThistle.com. Today I am so excited to join up with my friend Lindy from Love Create Celebrate for some dollar store DIYs. We are actually calling this the Dollar Store DIY Challenge, and we want you to join in. We are going to be doing 4 more videos like this year, and I put all the dates for the future challenges down in the description box below, so you can mark them in your calendar and you can join in with us. For today's video, we just wanted to tell you about it and show you some dollar store DIYs because we love those. So I have made these 6 different dollar store DIYs here. They are modern, they are beautiful, and I honestly can't believe that they came from the dollar store. And then at the end of the video, I will link my friend Lindy's video as well, where she's making DIYs for her kitchen. Before we get into it, if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I would so love if you did that below so you don't miss out on any more DIY or home decor videos. Alright, the first DIY that I'm going to be doing is the mini weave using these yarns that I found at the dollar store, a mop, and a pair of fuzzy socks. I just kind of walked around the dollar store looking for the texture that I knew I wanted since they didn't have any really chunky yarn. This worked out really well. Stick with me. Alright, so the first thing I did is pulled the mop apart. I used some pliers to loosen where it was connected, and then I just pulled the fibers out of the mop. Next up, I took a sturdy box that I had, and I'm making my own loom here. I'm just using a little saw to cut slits in it and running the thread back and forth through it to make a loom. These strings could probably have been closer together, and you'll see that, especially with some of the thinner yarns that we are using. The dollar store yarns are pretty thin, but it does work out pretty well. I'll give some tips through this. This is a free loom, so I recommend it. This is the second time I've done this with a cardboard box. The needles that I'm using here are plastic darning needles. They're really affordable. I think it was $1.50 at the fabric store for 3 of them. I got these a while back. So I'm just going to start by weaving yarn through just like a normal weave, under, over, and going back and forth until I get a chunk of color, the thickness that I would like, before I move on to the next one here. So I'll just speed that up. Alright, so at this point I do feel a little bit silly making a tutorial for something that I don't really know much about, but my hope is that this encourages you to just try something new, even if it's not technically perfect or technically the way that you should be doing weavings. If you're just looking for an affordable piece of home decor for your own house, like, this is freaking amazing and cheap. So next up, I used the piece of the mop, and I am using a stitch that's going to kind of look like a braid at the end of it. So I'm going under 2 threads, and then after I come up, I go back down through the one that I skipped over. So I'm just doing this over and over. It's kind of like looping it. Under 2, back over 1, under 2, back over 1 until I get to the other side. Now, since I was using a mop for this, not yarn, the pieces were fairly short. I could only go one direction, and then I needed to pick up another piece of yarn to go back the other direction. Now, you want to make sure that you go back the other direction instead of starting from the same side again, so that you get that braided look. Otherwise, you'll just get like a slanted look repeating pattern. So you can see I'm just going to try and tie off those knots, and I'll tuck them underneath. If you wanted to, you could even hot glue them underneath when you're done, or you could weave some of the longer strings back through and to just knot them off. Again, not technically perfect, but it totally works. Going back through with this kind of greenish gray blue yarn here, just in a standard weave pattern again. So I'll kind of hop over that. Next up, I'm cutting a bunch of yarn that is the same length of this steel blue color here. I really like the color, but it's just so thin, and I wanted some diversity of texture. So speaking of diversity of texture, I'm cutting chunks of these socks to basically make yarn, and I'm going to weave those through just a section of this here using the darning needle as well. I am not going the whole way across. I'm just going to do kind of a random back and forth pattern here, just to break up the straight across lines of this mini weave. I'm going to fill in the space beside the socks portion of the weaving with black yarn, and I am trying to do it in that same braiding pattern, but this yarn was just too thin with the strings on this loom spaced so far apart, so I would not recommend doing this, but I went with it. I would either do a basic weave right there or choose a chunkier yarn to do this if your loom is as spacious as this one here. All right, on to the blue. So since I kind of wound this thread around and around, I left the loop on the one end of the yarn. So when I went back through, because I started in the middle, I just pulled it through that loop to tie off that one end. It worked really well. Again, I know it's not technically correct for weaving, but I'm not teaching you how to weave properly. I'm teaching you how to hack dollar store supplies to make a weaving for your house. So I just did the regular weave, and I love with so many strings going through at the same time. It kind of gives a basket weave pattern, and it gives a little bit of a different texture than the other pieces that we've already put in there. All right, last but not least, we are finishing it off with the thin black yarn again in just a standard weave pattern, and then we are going to add some tassels to the bottom. So for the tassels, I took those chunks of the mop and I pulled them apart. They were kind of 3 threads woven together to make a thicker cord, and so I am just using those thinner pieces of cotton here, and I'm going to make a tassel. So to do that, you just wrap it around your hand and then pinch it, tie off the top with a knot, and then cut the loops on the long end into a tassel shape. And I would do it like this and trim off that knot, and then we are going to use another thread with the needle to tie it onto the bottom of the weaving so that they stay in place. Here's where I am making it up as I go again. What I am going to do is I'm going to recommend a YouTube channel of an amazing Canadian fiber artist who is on YouTube here and has really great tutorials that I should have watched before I made this, not after. But I basically just cut it off at the loom and tied knots at the end of the weave and knots over the dowel at the beginning of the weave, and that held it in place. This is what I've done on previous mini weaves, but if I'm going to do any kind of weaving again, I think that I'll follow a little bit more of a tutorial and try to do it a bit properly. This was definitely fun and it made it work. It's perfect for my home, but it's definitely not professional. But I think all in all, this cost me around $10, and I feel like that just cannot be beat for a beautiful, full of texture mini wall hanging. All right, next up, let's try a TikTok trend. So this has been going around. If you are on TikTok, you've probably seen it. Here is kind of a little bit more of a detailed breakdown on how to make twisty candles. I've even seen some people do these with birthday candles to make them super fun shapes. I just found these green candles in a 6-pack at the dollar store. They're beautiful olive green, and I'm just running tap hot water and soaking them in there while I make this candle holder. So I have these wooden rings left over from ornaments that I made at Christmas time. They are also from the dollar store, and I am just gluing them into a stack. After making this, I think I want to go get more and make a whole set of them, and I might spray paint them a beautiful matte black, but for the sake of this project, I left them a natural wood color. We'll come back to those in a second, but once the candles were soft, after about 10 minutes, I was able to bend them. So I wanted to leave this one real time so you could see that you definitely need to go slow. I did break one from trying to bend it before they were soft enough, and I just tried to bend it a little bit harder instead of waiting for it to soften up and go slow. So you can see it's a little bit slow, but it's totally fun to be able to manipulate the candles and make them the shape that you want. Let's speed it up here and finish them off. I did a couple wiggle candles. I tried one in a knot. I did one with like a curl to make itself its own stand. That one is probably my favorite. But yeah, they were really fun to play with. Your hands get a little bit greasy or waxy, but overall super easy DIY and really rewarding for the cost. So for some of them, I found I did have to hold them after I pulled them out of the water just until they started to harden a little bit. All right, back to the candle holder. So these rings were a little bit bigger than I realized. The candle didn't sit snug in them. So here I am. I tried to add some hot glue and put it in, but it just looked loose. So I went and I got these metal, they're like tighteners for candle holders. I've had them forever. I can't even remember where I got them, probably a dollar store at some point in time, but I used 2 of them just to snug up the opening here. And again, if I were to do this again, I think that I'd spray paint the whole thing matte black so that you don't even notice those little silver pieces in there. You can see in the final images here, it's kind of got a speckled pattern on the candles from the wax, and I actually love how this looks. I like how it adds a little bit extra texture. All right, let's make some pillows. So for this first one here, I am using a scarf. This was just a few dollars. It has beautiful neutral colors in kind of this large plaid pattern, and then it's got tassels on the end. So I'm going to pick which end that I want to use that has the colors I like the most, and I'm going to wrap it around this pillow and just pin it the size that I would like to sew the cover. And for this one here, I am going to do kind of an envelope style pillow tutorial, which means that you can just pop the pillow in and out without sewing in any zippers, and so it is washable. So you can see I'm just wrapping it around, and then I will pin at each of the corners as well as a fold to finish the edge here. So after I got it looking the way that I wanted it, then I went ahead and I pinned it inside out so that when I sewed it, it would turn right way out and look beautiful. The first seam that I sewed is just the fold over. This is the inside of the pocket on the pillow here, and you can see that the thread shows up quite a bit, and that's because I'm using a different color top thread as I am a bobbin. So when I flip it over, you can see that that stitch disappears compared to on the back side there. So now I've turned the pillowcase and I'm going to sew down the sides where I have those pins there. Because I'm sewing right over the tassels, I take some time and I kind of space those out so that they're nice and straight, so that I don't have any tassels looping in and out of my seam. And I'm going to pin that down just to make sure that I don't get anything wonky in there. These are just 3 straight stitches to make this pillowcase. It's a super simple sewing project if you are newer to sewing. In almost every sewing project, I do recommend that you backstitch at the beginning and at the end of your straight stitches just to help hold it. So then once I'm done stitching, I am just cutting off any loose fabric, any extra bulk that would be inside of our pillowcase, and I'm using my fabric scissors to do this. Then I'm going to turn it right way out and stuff that pillow inside. This turned out so cute, and it only took me like 10 minutes to do, start to finish, and just a few dollars. The pillow inserts that I'm using here are old pillows from the couches that we got years ago. We've held on to the pillows because they're good quality, but we don't like the patterns on them. If you didn't have a pillow that you wanted to cover, I saw these furry ones at the dollar store for just $4. Okay, the second pillowcase that I'm going to make here is made out of this cotton rug. This cotton rug wasn't quite big enough to do an envelope pillowcase like I did on the last one. That would be my preference most of the time when I'm making pillowcases, because they are so simple with only 3 straight stitches on the sewing machine. So this one I'm doing a little bit differently. I am just sewing the edges together. I'm sewing as close to the edge as possible so that it fits the pillow. And I'm doing it very similar, except it's not going to fold over. There's going to be a gap, and that's just to make room for the pillow. And I'm going to use yarn to stitch it shut, and then we will kind of cover over that with some DIY tassels. So here it is turned around. Again, this is just straight stitches, making it into a little envelope, but with an opening at the back that we are going to cover up with yarn and tassels. So again, this is dollar store yarn. This is the same yarn that I used for the weaving in the black there. And I am just going back and forth over the edging of that rug to sew this space shut. Now, I originally thought that there would be a gap there and we just cover it over with tassels, but as I sewed, it kind of pulled shut really beautifully, so I ended up having no gap at all, and it made the pillowcase nice and snug on the pillow form. So you can see that as I'm sewing it, I'm going just in basic standard loops of stitches here, and as I pull it tight, I go back and I adjust all the previous stitches and it closes that gap right up. Okay, next up is tassels, exactly the same as the ones that we made for the weaving. We are just going to wrap the yarn around our hand a few times and then tie off one end and snip the other end from loops into a tassel. Then I'm going to take another piece of yarn and I'm going to use that to tie it right onto the pillow. I am just stitching right through the rug so that these tassels don't shift around. And I went over the entire seam and I liked the way that that looked, but it just looked similar to the other pillow cover that we just made. So I made extra tassels and I did a second row in a little bit of an organic line, and I love the way that this second row adds some character to this pillowcase. It makes it look more high-end than just the one straight layer of tassels. All right, the last DIY here is this vase. So I got these low glass vases from the dollar store. This is actually a DIY I'd spotted on someone's Insta story. They didn't really give a tutorial, but they did explain how to do them, so I wanted to give it a try myself. So I glued 3 of these together and I decided to use it as a vase. I love having vases and I will always take another one. So I've been looking for a black vase that I could use and I couldn't find one that I totally loved. And so I'm gonna paint this one after gluing them all together with a baking soda and acrylic paint mixture. Now this is another TikTok trend. Clearly I've been spending too much time over there. If you're on TikTok, I would love if you followed along with me over there too. I'm also just Colleen Pasteur over there. So you mix acrylic craft paint and baking soda together, and this makes kind of like a lumpy paint mixture, and it gives the paint a gritty finish. So it kind of looks like painted ceramic instead of smooth glass. I really love that effect for this vase and for this black paint. I think that it makes the DIY look a little bit more high-end instead of that smooth glass, especially if we were to have paint lines in it. I'm just so impressed with how this worked. So this is just dollar store paint and this is dollar store baking soda. And then just slap it on there. I did 2 coats and I flipped it over and also painted the bottom, and I painted the top of the inside glass bowl. Okay, so originally I thought that I'd put moss in it and call it the moss bowl trend, but I just hated it. I did not like it at all, so I switched it to a vase. I used chicken wire, which you can get at the dollar store right now in the gardening section, and you can cut a small chunk of it and kind of make a ball out of it and pop it in the vase opening. This is a really great hack if you have a wide opening on your vase and you want to be able to arrange your flowers so they don't just all flop to one side or fall out. So for this vase, especially because it is so low and wide, this is a really great way to arrange greenery and florals in there. So you can reuse that ball of chicken wire, you just wash out your vase and leave it in there. All of these DIYs turned out so great. I truly, truly love how each and every one of them turned out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have not yet, I would so love if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more DIY or home decor videos. And if you are interested in joining the Dollar Store DIY Challenge playlist next time, I'll put the dates in the description box down below so you can save those, mark those in your calendar, and join us in the challenge next time. In the meantime, if you haven't checked out Lindy's video yet, you can go check that out where she's making some Dollar Store DIYs for her kitchen.